I am Iris Thompson, 24 years old, sitting across from my parents at our monthly family dinner. The chandelier gleams above our dining table in their suburban Boston home as we catch up over perfectly cooked steak. Dad cuts into his meat casual as ever and asks, "By the way, is the allowance amount still enough for your expenses?" I freeze fork midair, genuinely confused. "What allowance?" I ask. The color drains from his face instantly. The room falls silent before erupting into chaos. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if family betrayal stories like mine keep you coming back for more. To understand why that question shattered my world, I need to take you back to the beginning. My relationship with my father, Richard Thompson, had always been special. From building science projects together in elementary school to our shared love of mystery novels, Dad and I connected in ways that made me feel truly seen. He worked long hours as a financial executive at a prestigious firm, but he always made time for our Saturday morning breakfast dates at Lottie's Diner, just the two of us. My mother, Eleanor, on the other hand, maintained a certain emotional distance that I could never quite bridge. She was always perfectly put together from her manicured nails to her designer outfits, but warmth wasn't her strong suit. Her attention and affection were reserved primarily for my older sister, Stephanie. Stephanie was 27, 3 years, my senior, and the undisputed golden child of our family. Tall, blonde, and effortlessly charming, she had pursued a career in fashion and moved to Paris 2 years ago for what Mom called her grand European adventure. Their daily phone calls were filled with excited chatter about gallery openings, fashion shows, and the apparently fabulous life my sister was building across the ocean. Meanwhile, I had stayed closer to home, attending a state university on partial scholarship and working my way through a degree in business management. My life looked nothing like the glamorous existence my sister enjoyed. I rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town and maintained 2 jobs just to keep my head above water financially. The contrast between our lives couldn't have been more stark. While Stephanie posted Instagram photos from rooftop parties overlooking the Eiffel Tower, I was splitting my time between classes. My job as a barista at Woodland Cafe during the day and evening, shifts at Carson's restaurant as a table.com server. The exhaustion was constant, a companion that never left my side. College had been particularly rough financially. My scholarship covered only part of my tuition, and I had taken out substantial student loans to cover the rest. Every textbook purchase was carefully calculated, every grocery trip a mathematical equation of absolute necessities. I had learned to stretch $15 worth of ingredients into meals for an entire week. Just last month, the physical toll of maintaining this schedule finally caught up with me. After pulling a double shift at the restaurant following a full day at the cafe, I collapsed in the kitchen. My manager, Jenny, found me unconscious next to a tray of dirty dishes. The diagnosis at the emergency room was exhaustion and dehydration. The doctor had written a note insisting I reduce my working hours, which only added to my financial stress. Through all of this, our family maintained the tradition of monthly dinners at my parents' home in Brookline, a wealthy suburb of Boston. Their house was a spacious colonial with 4 bedrooms, a manicured lawn, and a kitchen that had been featured in a local home magazine. These dinners were ostensibly to keep us connected as a family, though tensions always simmered beneath the surface politeness. My father had built a successful career in financial management, providing our family with an upper-middle-class lifestyle that included private school education, summer vacations, to Martha's Vineyard, and the security of never having to worry about basic needs. He worked hard and took pride in providing for his family, though his long hours at the office meant he sometimes missed school events and family gatherings during my childhood. My mother had always handled the family finances. She paid the bills, managed the household accounts, and dispensed allowances when we were younger. Dad earned the money, but Mom controlled its flow within the family. She took this role seriously, keeping meticulous records and frequently reminding us of the importance of financial responsibility. When Stephanie decided to pursue fashion in Paris rather than the business degree Dad had hoped for, I expected some resistance. Instead, my parents fully supported her dream financially and emotionally. I had assumed this was because Stephanie had always been the favorite, the one whose aspirations somehow mattered more. That particular dinner in April had begun like any other. I arrived at 6:30 slightly late after finishing my shift at the cafe. My hair was hastily pulled back and I had changed from my coffee-stained work clothes into a simple blouse and jeans in the cafe bathroom. The contrast between my appearance and my mother's perfectly coordinated outfit was immediately apparent, though she made no direct comment. We had moved through the usual topics of conversation, my parents' work, local neighborhood gossip, and of course updates from Stephanie in Paris, delivered secondhand by my mother with theatrical enthusiasm. I had shared minimal details about my own life, knowing my academic and career achievements never seemed to generate the same excitement as my sister's adventures. And then, as we were finishing our main course, Dad had asked that question that would change everything, a simple inquiry about an allowance I had never received. What allowance? The question hung in the air between us as the gravity of those two words slowly registered on my father's face. The monthly allowance, Dad said slowly, his fork now completely forgotten beside his plate. The $2,000 I have been transferring to the account your mother set up for you since your first year of college. The dining room suddenly felt too warm, too small. Mom became intensely interested in rearranging her silverware, avoiding eye contact with either of us. Dad, I never received any allowance, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Not a single dollar. Dad turned to Mom, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing anger. Eleanor, what is this about? Mom laughed lightly, a sound that carried no humor. Richard, there must be some misunderstanding. Perhaps Iris forgot about the account. Young people are so disorganized with money these days. No, I said, finding my voice growing stronger. There is no misunderstanding. I have been working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I have been eating ramen noodles for dinner most nights, because I cannot afford groceries after paying rent and student loans. I collapsed from exhaustion last month because I have been working myself to death. If I had been receiving $2,000 monthly, none of that would have happened. Dad pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. I have made transfers of $2,000 on the 15th of every month for the past 4 years. That is $96,000, Eleanor. His voice had taken on a dangerous calm. Where is that money? Mom stood up, abruptly gathering plates. This is hardly dinner conversation, Richard. We can discuss financial matters in private. Sit down. Dad rarely raised his voice, but when he did it, commanded attention. Mom sank back into her chair. Eleanor, where is the money that was meant for Iris? A flush spread across Mom's cheeks. Stephanie needed additional support for her career in Paris. The fashion industry is extremely competitive, and she needed to maintain certain appearances. The right clothes, the right connections. So you took money explicitly meant for Iris and gave it to Stephanie, Dad clarified, his voice rising. I redirected some funds to where they were most needed, Mom corrected as if the semantic difference mattered. Iris has always been independent. Stephanie has different needs. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those nights I had gone to bed hungry, all the times I had skipped necessary doctor appointments, because I could not afford the copay, all the hours I had worked until my body literally gave out, all while my mother had been diverting thousands of dollars meant for me to my sister. Let's call Stephanie, Dad said, suddenly pulling out his phone again. Right now? Richard, she is probably busy. Mom protested, but Dad had already dialed and put the phone on speaker. Daddy Stephanie's voice, slightly slurred, filled the dining room. Music and laughter echoed in the background. What a surprise! Is everything okay? It is like 2 a.m. here. Stephanie, I need to ask you something important, Dad said. Have you been receiving extra money from your mother beyond what we agreed for your Paris expenses? A pause, then nervous laughter. Well, Mom said you were okay with helping a bit more with my apartment and stuff. The rent in the fashion district is crazy expensive, Daddy. And what about the shopping trips, the weekend trips to Milan and Barcelona, Dad pressed. Mom said that was from her personal account, Stephanie replied, sounding increasingly uncertain. She said you wanted me to make the right impressions and connections for my career. Is something wrong? Dad closed his eyes briefly. That money was meant for Iris, every cent of it. Oh. The single syllable carried sudden understanding. I did wonder how Mom could afford all this. She takes me shopping at Chanel and Dior whenever she visits. We just got back from a weekend in Monaco. I felt physically ill. While I had been collapsing from exhaustion, my mother and sister had been shopping at Chanel and vacationing in Monaco with money meant for me. Is Iris there? Stephanie asked, her voice smaller now. Yes, I managed to say. I did not know, Stephanie said quickly. I swear I thought it was all approved by both of you. Mom never said anything about it being your money. The conversation continued, but I was barely listening. My mind was racing through 4 years of unnecessary struggle. The internship at a marketing firm I had turned down because I could not afford to reduce my cafe hours. The textbooks I had shared with classmates because I could not buy my own copies. The nights I had gone to bed with hunger pangs because my food budget had run out. When Dad ended the call, the silence in the dining room was deafening. My mother still would not meet my eyes. Where did the money go exactly? Dad asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. I want a full accounting. Most went directly to Stephanie's Paris account, Mom admitted. Some covered my trips to visit her, the shopping, the restaurants. She needed to build the right image, Richard. You know how important appearances are in her industry. And what about your daughter who was working herself to the point of hospitalization? Dad demanded. Did her needs not matter at all? Iris has always been capable of taking care of herself, Mom said, as if this justified everything. She has your practical nature. Stephanie is more delicate. The calculated manipulation took my breath away. For years, Mom had characterized me as independent and self-sufficient, not as compliments, but as justification for withholding support. Meanwhile, Stephanie was sensitive and artistic qualities that apparently warranted unlimited financial backing. As the argument intensified, more revelations emerged. Mom had been intercepting mail from the bank that might have alerted me to the account. She had told Dad that my refusal to discuss money matters with him was because I valued my independence, when in reality, I had no idea there was anything to discuss. $96,000. Dad repeated the number, hanging heavy in the air between us. Nearly $100,000 that could have changed the entire course of Iris's college experience. That could have prevented her hospitalization. That could have allowed her to take internships in her field instead of burning herself out at service jobs. The magnitude of what had been taken from me expanded beyond just the money. It was opportunities, health, peace of mind. 4 years of my life that could have been entirely different. The dinner that had begun with such ordinary politeness had devolved into a scene I could never have imagined in our proper New England household. Dad paced the dining room, occasionally stopping to examine the bank statements on his phone as if searching for some alternative explanation that would make sense of this betrayal. $2,400 for a weekend in Barcelona, he read from his screen. $3,000 at Dior. 5 nights at a spa resort in the Alps. Is this what you have been doing with Iris's money? Mom's composure began to crack under the specificity of these accusations. You have always been too frugal. Richard, Stephanie is trying to build connections in a competitive industry. Those connections happen over drinks at exclusive clubs, at fashion shows, at the right restaurants. So you stole from one daughter to fund the other's socializing. Dad's voice rose again. You talk about my frugality like it is a character flaw, but what you have done is not just morally wrong, Eleanor, it is illegal. This was not your money to redirect. I sat silently watching my family splinter before my eyes. The shock was giving way to a deeper, seething anger as I processed the deliberate nature of my mother's actions. This had not been a mistake or oversight. It had been a calculated decision repeated month after month for 4 years. What else have you been hiding? Dad demanded. What other accounts have you been manipulating? Mom's defiance faltered slightly. Nothing that affects our main finances. This was a separate matter. A separate matter. I finally found my voice again. My entire college experience was shaped by financial stress that never needed to exist. I worked 30 hours a week on top of full-time classes because I thought I had to. I took out student loans that I am still paying off. How is that a separate matter? You managed just fine, Mom insisted. Look at how responsible and hardworking you have become. Stephanie needed that support more than you did. I collapsed at work. The words burst from me louder than intended. I was hospitalized because I was working myself to exhaustion. The doctor told me my body was shutting down from stress and overwork. Was that managing just fine? Mom had the audacity to look annoyed rather than remorseful. You have always had a flair for the dramatic Iris. One minor health incident does not negate the fact that you have always been more capable than your sister. Mom had the audacity to look annoyed. The casual dismissal of my hospitalization as a minor health incident sent a fresh wave of fury through me. I thought back to the emergency room, the IV in my arm, the doctor's stern warning that I was pushing my body beyond its limits. Minor? I should have questioned more. Dad said more to himself than to us. I should have made sure you were receiving the money. I just assumed when your mother said she had set up the account and you were using it for expenses. You trusted your wife, I said, meeting his distressed gaze. That is not a crime. No, but what she did, is he replied, turning back to Mom. Fraudulent misappropriation of funds. Do not be ridiculous, Richard, Mom scoffed. This is a family matter, not a legal one. It can easily become both, Dad warned. $96,000 is grand larceny by any definition. As they argued, pieces of my childhood began to click into place. The way Mom had always managed to divert Dad's attention from my achievements while spotlighting Stephanie's whole say, the family vacations planned around Stephanie's preferences. The constant comparisons that always somehow concluded with Stephanie requiring more time, attention, and resources while I needed to be more independent. When I wanted to attend that writing workshop in 10th grade, I said slowly, a memory surfacing, you told me there was no money in the budget for extracurriculars that year. But Stephanie went to tennis camp in Florida that same summer. Mom waved dismissively. That was different. The tennis camp had college recruitment potential. And when I needed a laptop for school projects, I had to work all summer at the grocery store to buy my own. Stephanie got hers as a birthday present. Stephanie's major required specific design software, Mom countered. My high school graduation gift was a $50 bookstore gift card. Stephanie got a car. She needed transportation for her internship. Mom replied, but her justifications were sounding increasingly hollow. It has always been like this, I realized aloud. My entire life, you have been directing family resources to Stephanie at my expense. This was just the most blatant example. Dad looked physically ill as he listened to this exchange. Eleanor, what is this about? Why would you consistently deprive one child while spoiling the other? For the first time that evening, Mom seemed at a loss for words. The question had pierced through her wall of justifications. She has always been jealous of your relationship with Iris, a new voice said from the doorway. Aunt Lydia, my mother's sister, had arrived for coffee and dessert as previously planned and had clearly overheard enough to understand the situation. Eleanor has resented the bond you two share since Iris was a little girl. Mom shot her sister a venomous look. That is absurd. Is it Aunt Lydia moved into the dining room, setting her purse aside? You have been competing with your own daughter for Richard's attention and approval for years. I have watched it happen and said nothing, which makes me partly responsible for this mess. The family dynamics that had shaped my entire life were being laid bare in the most painful way possible. Mom's coldness toward me had never been about my actions or character. It had been about her own insecurities and jealousy. I stood up abruptly, overwhelmed by these revelations. I need some air. No one stopped me as I walked out of the dining room through the front door and into the cool evening air. Behind me, I could hear the argument continuing, voices rising and falling. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Stephanie alternating between apologies and explanations. Sitting on the front steps of my parents' beautiful home, I calculated the true cost of what had been taken from me. $96,000 would have covered my entire tuition without loans. It would have meant I could work one part-time job instead of two full-time ones. It would have allowed me to take that marketing internship that might have launched my career in a completely different direction. But the money was only part of it. The deeper betrayal was knowing that my mother had systematically undermined me my entire life out of some twisted jealousy over my relationship with my father. Every struggle I had faced had been at least in part by her design. I did not go back inside my parents' house that night. Instead, I drove home to my small apartment, tears blurring my vision so badly that I had to pull over twice to collect myself. The weight of the evening's revelations pressed against my chest, making it difficult to breathe. Once home, I collapsed onto my worn secondhand couch, the springs digging into my back, a physical discomfort that matched my emotional state. The walls of my apartment, always thin, seemed to press inward as neighbors' voices and television sounds filtered through. This cramped space represented years of unnecessary struggle, all because my mother had decided I deserved less than my sister. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night pacing, alternating between rage and grief, occasionally picking up my phone to read the continuing stream of texts from my father and sister. Around 3 a.m, I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror, studying my exhausted reflection. The dark circles under my eyes, the hollowness in my cheeks, these were physical manifestations of the financial hardship that had never been necessary. My mind kept returning to the hospital visit just weeks earlier. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room, the concerned face of the doctor as he reviewed my vitals, the cold plastic of the hospital bed beneath me. "Your body is sending you a clear message," he had told me. "This pace is unsustainable." I had nodded, all while mentally calculating how quickly I could return to work because missing shifts meant missing rent. All while my mother had been sitting on $2,000 per month that was rightfully mine. The memory that kept returning sharp as a knife was from 6 months ago. A prestigious marketing firm had offered me an internship that perfectly aligned with my career goals. The position was part-time and paid only a small stipend, not enough to live on. I had called my parents, cautiously inquiring if they might help with expenses for the 3-month duration. "We simply do not have extra funds right now," Iris' mom had said firmly. "Your father and I are already stretching our budget with Stephanie's Paris expenses. This is an important lesson in financial planning. Sometimes we have to defer opportunities until we can afford them." I had declined the internship and picked up extra shifts at the restaurant instead. 2 weeks later, Mom had flown to Paris for a necessary visit to Stephanie, posting photos from 5-star restaurants and designer boutiques on social media. The sun was rising when a sharp knock at my door startled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find my mother standing there, perfectly put together despite the early hour. "We need to discuss this situation rationally," she announced, stepping past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes swept over my modest living space with poorly concealed disdain. "Your dramatic exit last night solved nothing." "Dramatic?" I repeated, incredulous. "Finding out my mother has been stealing from me for 4 years warrants a dramatic response." "Stealing is a harsh word," she countered, setting her designer handbag on my kitchen counter. "I made parental decisions about financial distribution based on comparative need." "No," I said, finding strength in the simple refusal. "You stole money that Dad specifically designated for me. You watched me struggle, get sick from overwork, take on debt, all while you had access to funds that could have prevented all of it, and you did it deliberately." Mom's composure wavered slightly. "You have always been your father's favorite. From the moment you were born, he has looked at you with a pride and affection he never showed Stephanie or me. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" The absurdity of her jealousy momentarily stunned me into silence. She had used her power as a parent to punish me for a bond I had formed as a child with my own father. "So this was revenge?" I asked, my voice rising, "making me suffer because Dad and I are close." "Not revenge," she corrected coldly. "Balance. Stephanie needed advantages to compensate for not being the favorite. You had your father's love and support that gave you a natural confidence Stephanie never had." "My father's emotional support does not pay tuition or rent," I shouted, years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. "It does not buy groceries or textbooks. You deliberately made my life harder out of jealousy toward your own daughter." "You do not understand family dynamics," Mom sniffed. "When you have children of your own someday, you will understand the importance of creating balance." "This was not balance," I countered. "This was sabotage. You have been sabotaging me my entire life." My phone rang, interrupting our confrontation. Stephanie's name flashed on the screen. I answered on speaker, wanting Mom to hear whatever my sister had to say. "Iris, I am so sorry," Stephanie began, her voice thick with tears. "I had no idea the money was meant for you. Mom told me Dad wanted to support my career specially because of the international opportunities. I should have questioned it more. You were not the one writing the checks, I replied, eyes fixed on Mom. You were not the one watching me work myself into hospitalization while holding my money. I feel horrible, Stephanie continued. All those times I complained about Paris prices, and Mom immediately transferred more funds, all those shopping trips. Meanwhile, you were struggling so much. I remember when you told me you could not come visit because you could not afford the plane ticket, and I just accepted it without question. Because that is what Mom wanted, I said. She created this dynamic between us deliberately. I am coming home, Stephanie declared. I booked a flight for tomorrow. We need to fix this, all of us together. And Iris, I will pay back every cent, I promise. After the call ended, my mother and I stood in tense silence. The morning light streamed through my single window, illuminating the stark simplicity of my apartment, the visible evidence of my financial constraints. Stephanie has always been too easily influenced by your father, Mom finally said. She does not understand the complexities of family financial management. Stop, I said firmly. There is no justification for what you did. None. You betrayed me, you betrayed Dad, and you even betrayed Stephanie by making her an unwitting accomplice to your theft. For the first time, I saw something like doubt cross my mother's features. I did what I thought was best for the family as a whole. No, I countered. You did what satisfied your own insecurities and jealousy, and you destroyed my trust in the process. Mom gathered her purse, her mask of composure, firmly back in place. You have always had a tendency toward melodrama, Iris. When you have calmed down, we can discuss reasonable steps forward. She moved toward the door. And perhaps keep the legal threats to a minimum. We are still family after all. As the door closed behind her, I felt something break and reform inside me. The weight of confusion and self-doubt that had followed me my entire life suddenly made sense. The constant message that I was somehow less deserving than my sister had never been about my capabilities or choices. It had been about my mother's own broken relationship with herself and with my father. For the first time, I saw with perfect clarity that I had done nothing to deserve less. Nothing to warrant the financial hardship I had endured. The revelation was both devastating and liberating. I had been wronged in the most fundamental way possible by the person who should have protected me most. But in that knowledge came freedom from the self-doubt that had plagued me for years. I picked up my phone and called my therapist, Susan. I need an emergency session, I told her voicemail. My family just imploded and I need help processing it. Then I called my father. Dad, I need some time to think about all this. But I want you to know that I do not blame you. You thought you were providing for me. Mom is the one who made sure that support never reached me. His voice was rough with emotion. I should have checked Iris. I failed you. We were both betrayed, I told him, and now we both need to figure out what happens next. 3 days after the explosive family dinner, I sat in Susan's office, surrounded by the calming blue walls and gentle lighting of her therapy space. For the past hour, I had been unpacking the bombshell revelations about my mother's betrayal. What you are describing is financial abuse, Susan said calmly. Your mother deliberately withheld resources that were rightfully yours, causing significant hardship and even health consequences. That is serious, Iris. I keep cycling between rage and disbelief, I admitted. There were so many moments when she watched me struggle knowing she was sitting on money meant for me. How does a mother do that to her child? Your mother's behavior suggests deep-seated issues around jealousy and control, Susan replied. This does not excuse her actions, but it might help explain them. The question now is what boundaries you need to establish moving forward. Boundaries. The word felt simultaneously empowering and terrifying. My entire life had been defined by an absence of healthy boundaries with my mother. She had controlled, manipulated, and exploited family dynamics for her own emotional needs, and I had never recognized it clearly enough to protect myself. I do not think I can be around her right now, I said. Maybe not for a long time. Susan nodded. That is a valid boundary. What about your father and sister? This was more complicated. Dad had been calling daily, devastated by his unwitting role in the situation. He had already consulted with the bank about legal options for recovering the misappropriated funds and had moved out of the family home temporarily, unable to face my mother's betrayal. Stephanie had returned from Paris as promised, staying at a hotel rather than our parents' house. Her texts expressed profound remorse and a desire to make amends, though I was not yet ready to see her in person. "Dad wants to pay me back everything immediately," I explained to Susan. "He has offered to transfer the full $96,000 plus interest to a new account in my name only." "How do you feel about that?" Susan asked. I sighed, conflicted. On one hand, it would change my financial situation overnight. I could pay off my student loans, reduce my work hours, maybe even look for a job more aligned with my degree. But it also feels strange taking such a large sum all at once. "The money was always meant for you," Susan reminded me gently. "Accepting it is not taking advantage or asking for special treatment. It is simply receiving what should have been yours all along." After the therapy session, I met Dad at a quiet cafe downtown. The strain of the past few days showed clearly on his face. New lines had formed around his eyes, and his normally immaculate appearance seemed slightly rumpled. "I have set up a new account," he said after we had ordered coffee. "I want to transfer the full amount today if you will accept it." "I will," I said, having made my decision during the walk from Susan's office. "But I want to use some of it to pay for therapy for all of us if Mom will agree to go." This situation did not develop overnight, and fixing it will take more than just replacing the money. Dad nodded, relief visible in his expression. "I think that is wise. I have already found a family therapist who specializes in these issues, and a separate therapist just for me. I need to understand how I missed the signs for so long." We discussed practical matters, his temporary move to a furnished apartment, the joint accounts he had already separated, the consultation with a lawyer, about the legal implications of what Mom had done. Throughout the conversation, I could see him struggling with the dual roles of protecting me while processing his own sense of betrayal. "How are you really doing with all this?" I finally asked him. He stared into his coffee cup. 30 years of marriage, and I never truly knew who I was married to. That is difficult to accept. I keep replaying moments in my mind, looking for signs I should have noticed. The pain in his voice was palpable. Mom's betrayal had fractured his entire understanding of his life and marriage. Later that week, Stephanie and I finally met at a park near my apartment. The spring air was cool but pleasant as we sat on a bench overlooking a small pond. My sister looked different, somehow diminished. The designer clothes and perfect styling that had always been her trademark had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. "I did not know," she began immediately. "I swear to you, Iris, I had no idea that money was meant for you. Mom always presented it as Dad wanting to specially support my fashion career." "I believe you," I said, and I did. My sister had been manipulated as surely as I had been, just in a different way. Mom had used her as a tool in a decades-long campaign of emotional warfare. "I have already withdrawn everything from the Paris account," Stephanie continued. "It is not the full amount, but it is a start. About $30,000. I want you to have it immediately." The gesture moved me unexpectedly. "What will you do without that money?" "Get a real job," she said with a weak smile. "Like I should have been doing all along. Mom's unlimited funding let me play at having a fashion career without actually building real skills or connections. I have been more of a professional shopper than a professional anything else." This candid admission surprised me. "I always thought you were living your dream in Paris." Stephanie shook her head. "I was living Mom's version of my dream. The fancy apartment, the social events, the shopping, it was all about appearance, not actual career building. I have exactly 0 job prospects and a resume full of vague fashion consulting positions that Mom basically invented." As we talked, a new understanding began to form between us. We had both been manipulated by our mother, cast into roles that served her emotional needs rather than our own development. Stephanie as the perpetually needy, socially ambitious daughter who required constant financial support. Me as the self-sufficient, emotionally resilient daughter who needed nothing and could be safely ignored. "I do not even know if I actually like fashion," Stephanie confessed, tears forming in her eyes. "I just knew it made Mom happy and kept the money flowing." "How pathetic is that? 27 years old, and I have no idea who I am without Mom's influence. I reached out and took my sister's hand. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, we were seeing each other clearly without the distorting lens of our mother's manipulation. The following weekend brought the most difficult meeting of all, a family session with Dr. Gregory Palmer, the therapist Dad had found who specialized in family financial abuse. Mom had initially refused to attend, calling the whole situation overblown, but Dad's threat of legal action had finally convinced her. We sat in uncomfortable silence in Dr. Palmer's warmly lit office. Mom maintained her perfect posture and neutral expression, as if we were at a slightly tedious social event rather than a therapy session addressing her years of deception. Financial abuse within families often goes unrecognized. Dr. Palmer began because money matters are typically considered private and family financial decisions are rarely questioned from the outside. But what happened here was not simply poor financial management or differing priorities. It was a deliberate misappropriation of funds designated for Iris, causing her significant harm. Mom shifted slightly in her chair. I made decisions I believed were in the family's best interest. By what measure was causing one daughter to work until hospitalization, while the other shopped in designer stores in the family's best interest? Dad asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. The session continued with painful honesty, Dr. Palmer guiding us through the impact of Mom's actions on each family member. I spoke about the physical and emotional toll of unnecessary financial hardship. Stephanie described the hollow feeling of realizing her Parisian lifestyle had been funded through deception. Dad talked about the profound breach of trust in his marriage. Mom remained largely defensive, offering justifications rather than apologies. Families pool resources based on need, she insisted. Stephanie needed more support to establish herself in a competitive industry. That was not your unilateral decision to make with money specifically designated for Iris, Dr. Palmer replied calmly. And the pattern extends beyond just these funds. From what everyone has shared, there has been a consistent inequality in how resources and emotional support have been distributed between your daughters throughout their lives. By the session's end, it was clear that reconciliation would be a long and uncertain process. Mom had agreed to continue therapy, both individual and family sessions, though her commitment seemed more about damage control than genuine remorse. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Palmer addressed me directly. Iris, establishing clear boundaries is crucial for your healing process. What those boundaries look like is entirely up to you, distance-limited, contact-specific topics that are off-limits. But you have every right to protect yourself from further harm. In the parking lot afterward, Dad handed me an envelope. Inside was a bank card and account information. It is all there, he said quietly. Everything that should have been yours all along, plus interest. Use it however you need to. The weight of the card in my hand represented more than just financial freedom. It was tangible proof that my struggles had been unnecessary, my hardships engineered by someone who should have protected me. But it also represented a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. With $96,000 plus interest now secured in an account only I could access, my first action was surprisingly modest. I reduced my hours at both jobs from 40 hours per week each to a more sustainable 20 hours at just the cafe. The immediate relief of not having to rush from one job to another left me almost dizzy with unexpected freedom. "You look different, Jenny," my manager at the cafe commented a week after I had cut back my hours, less haunted. I smiled as I wiped down the espresso machine. Amazing what happens when you sleep more than 4 hours a night. My second decision was to consult with a financial advisor, someone with no connection to my family. Melissa Parker specialized in helping young professionals create sustainable financial plans. We met in her downtown office, surrounded by plants and motivational posters. "First, let's establish some immediate goals," Melissa said after I had explained my situation. "Then we can talk about longer-term planning." Under her guidance, I allocated funds to pay off my student loans, immediately set aside 6 months of living expenses as an emergency fund, and made a budget that allowed for a reasonable quality of life while preserving most of the principal amount for future opportunities. "You have been given a financial reset button," Melissa explained. "Used wisely, this money can create a foundation for long-term security rather than just temporary relief." With my financial situation stabilized, I turned my attention to career development. The marketing internship I had been forced to decline was no longer available, but with my reduced work schedule, I could finally start applying for positions related to my business degree. By June, I had secured a part-time marketing assistant position at a local tech startup. The role paid modestly, but offered valuable experience and the potential for growth. I maintained reduced hours at the cafe for additional income, creating a schedule that was busy but no longer physically punishing. My relationship with my family continued to evolve in complex ways. Dad and I met weekly for dinner, rebuilding our connection on more honest terms. He remained moved out of the family home, staying in his furnished apartment, while attending both individual and couples therapy with Mom. She is trying in her way, he told me during one of our dinners. But there is so much damaged trust to repair. With all of us. I nodded, understanding the complicated emotions he was navigating. Are you considering divorce? I asked directly. He sighed deeply. I do not know, Iris. 30 years is a long time to share with someone. But I also do not know if I can ever fully trust her again. My boundaries with Mom remained firm. I agreed to see her only in therapy sessions, unwilling to expose myself to her manipulations in unstructured settings. During these sessions, she vacillated between grudging acknowledgement of wrongdoing and subtle attempts to reframe the narrative. I may have made errors in judgment, she would say, but my intentions were to support both my daughters in the ways I thought best. Dr. Palmer was skilled at redirecting these deflections. Eleanor, impact matters more than intent. The impact of your decisions cause significant harm to Iris, regardless of how you frame your intentions. Stephanie had remained in Boston rather than returning to Paris, moving into a modest apartment and finding work as an administrative assistant at a local fashion magazine. The position was entry-level but legitimate, requiring actual skills rather than just social connections. It is strange, she told me over coffee one afternoon. I actually enjoy working and earning my own money. The sense of accomplishment is real, in a way that spending Mom's money never was. Our relationship was cautiously rebuilding, freed from the competitive dynamic Mom had fostered between us. We discovered shared interests and perspectives that had been obscured by years of manipulation. As Independence Day approached, Dad suggested a family meeting to discuss the upcoming holiday. Traditionally, we had always spent the 4th of July weekend at a rented beach house on Cape Cod, a tradition that now felt complicated by our fractured family dynamics. We gathered in Dr. Palmer's office, neutral territory, for this discussion. Mom arrived last, her expression carefully neutral as she took her seat. I think we should maintain the beach house tradition, she began without preamble. Appearances matter, and canceled family vacations will only create gossip in our social circle. I am not ready for that, I said firmly. Several days in close quarters, pretending everything is normal, is not where I am emotionally. This constant punishment is becoming excessive, Iris, Mom replied, her tone sharpening. I have apologized. I am attending therapy. What more must I do to earn forgiveness? Dr. Palmer intervened. Eleanor, characterizing Iris's boundaries as punishment, misframes the situation. Boundaries are protective, not punitive. And your apologies have been qualified at best, Stephanie added, surprising me with her directness. You say you are sorry, then immediately explain why your actions were justified. That is not actually an apology. Mom looked genuinely startled by Stephanie's criticism. For so long, my sister had been her ally and echo chamber. This new independence seemed to unsettle her more than anything else had. Perhaps this year we should each make independent plans for the holiday, Dad suggested diplomatically. Give ourselves space to process everything that has happened. The suggestion was ultimately accepted, though not without resistance from Mom. As we prepared to leave, she pulled me aside. I hope you realize what this is doing to our family, she said quietly. Your refusal to move forward is hurting everyone. I met her gaze steadily. What hurt our family was your choice to steal money meant for me. Watch me suffer the consequences. And feel justified in doing so. I am protecting myself now, which is what you should have been doing all along as my mother. It was perhaps the most direct I had ever been with her, and I saw something shift in her expression, a momentary crack in the facade of righteous certainty she had maintained. Later that month, I consulted with a lawyer about the legal implications of what had happened. Monica Vasquez specialized in financial fraud cases and listened attentively as I detailed the situation. "This is a clear case of financial fraud," she confirmed. "The funds were explicitly designated for you and redirected without consent of either the sender or intended recipient. You would have strong grounds for legal action if you choose to pursue it." "I am not sure I want to press charges against my own mother," I admitted. "But I needed to understand my options." Monica nodded. "Many family fraud cases go unreported for exactly that reason, but understanding your legal standing can be empowering even if you choose not to act on it. The knowledge that I had legal recourse should I choose to use it provided an unexpected sense of security. The power dynamic with my mother had shifted permanently. Her actions had not been merely unkind or unfair, they had been potentially criminal. By August, the changes in my life had accumulated into a new normal. My health had improved significantly with adequate rest and reduced stress. My marketing position had increased to 30 hours weekly with a modest raise. I had moved to a slightly larger apartment in a safer neighborhood, still living within my means but with improved quality of life. Most significantly, I had begun developing a small side business, creating social media content for local businesses, leveraging both my marketing education and creative skills. What had started as a favor for the cafe where I worked had expanded to include several clients who paid me for regular content creation. "You have natural talent for this," Jenny told me after I showed her the engagement metrics for the cafe's social accounts. "You have doubled our following in 3 months." The praise meant more than she could know. After a lifetime of being told I was merely practical and independent terms my mother had used to justify withholding support, discovering and developing a genuine talent felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been suppressed. When Dad called to suggest a small family gathering for Labor Day weekend, I felt strong enough to agree. We would meet at a restaurant rather than anyone's home, maintaining the neutral territory that still felt necessary. "Your mother has been doing intensive individual therapy," Dad told me. "Dr. Palmer thinks it might be beneficial for all of us to have some time together outside of therapy sessions." I agreed cautiously, setting clear boundaries about the length of the meal and topics I was not willing to discuss. The woman who had once accepted whatever treatment came her way, too exhausted to fight back, had been replaced by someone who understood her right to self-protection. 1 year after that fateful family dinner, I sat in my new home office, finalizing content for a client's social media campaign. The space was bright and comfortable, decorated with plants and inspirational prints. A far cry from the cramped corner of my old studio apartment, where I had once tried to study while exhausted from double shifts. My business, Iris Digital Marketing, had grown from a side hustle to a legitimate small business, with 5 regular clients and consistent monthly income. I had recently hired a part-time assistant, a college student named Jamie, who reminded me a bit of myself at that age, eager and hardworking, but without the crushing financial pressure I had experienced. The changes in my external circumstances were significant, but the internal transformation had been even more profound. The past year had been a journey through anger, grief, healing, and eventually a new kind of strength. My father appeared in the doorway of my office, 2 coffee cups in hand. He had come over to help me assemble some new furniture, a standing desk that would give me the option to work without sitting all day. Taking a break, he asked, offering one of the mugs. I nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. Dad looked better than he had in months. The initial shock and devastation had gradually given way to a more settled kind of sadness, tinged with new purpose. He had remained in his own apartment, though he and Mom continued marriage counseling with mixed results. "I was thinking about last year," I said as we sat in the small seating area of my office. "How different everything is now." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes I still cannot believe what happened, that your mother could do that to you, to all of us." The repayment plan we had established was still in effect. Beyond the initial $96,000, Dad had immediately transferred to me. Stephanie had contributed $30,000 from her Paris account. Mom had been required as part of our family healing process to sell some of her personal luxury items, jewelry, designer, handbags, and other accessories to contribute to the restitution fund. The financial restoration was important, but even more valuable had been the restoration of truth in our family system. The dynamics that had poisoned our relationships for decades had been brought into the light, examined, and slowly reconfigured. "How do you feel about seeing Mom next week?" Dad asked cautiously. We had agreed to a family dinner to mark the 1-year anniversary of the revelation, a symbolic opportunity to assess our progress. "I am okay with it," I said, and meant it. The anger is not gone, but it does not control me anymore. My relationship with my mother would never be what it might have been in a healthy family. Her jealousy and resentment had run too deep for too long. Even intensive therapy had only moved her to a place of intellectual understanding of her wrongdoing, rather than deep emotional remorse. "She is who she is," I had told Susan during one of our therapy sessions. "I can accept that without allowing it to harm me anymore." Stephanie had undergone perhaps the most surprising transformation. After a lifetime of being the golden child dependent on our mother's financial and emotional support, she had built genuine independence. Her position at the fashion magazine had led to a junior editorial role, and she had discovered actual talent for identifying emerging designers. "I think I was always afraid to really try," she had confessed during one of our now regular sister dinners. "If I failed on my own merits, I could not blame it on lack of opportunity or support. Mom's overindulgence was actually a kind of sabotage. It prevented me from developing real confidence in my abilities." Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us had experienced before: an authentic sisterhood based on mutual respect and understanding. The competitive dynamic our mother had fostered had been replaced by genuine support for each other's distinct paths. As Dad and I finished our coffee, I showed him the latest analytics for my business. "Client engagement is up 28% this quarter," I explained. "If this trend continues, I can expand to hire Jamie full-time by next spring." The pride in his eyes was unmistakable. "You have built something remarkable, Iris. Not just the business, but this new life. Your resilience is extraordinary." Later that evening, alone in my apartment, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The revelation of my mother's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been the catalyst for profound change. Without that painful truth, I might have continued struggling unnecessarily, believing my difficulties were due to personal inadequacy rather than deliberate sabotage. The financial security provided by the recovered funds had created opportunity, but the deeper healing had come from understanding that I had never been the problem. The narrative I had internalized, that I was somehow less deserving than my sister, that my struggles were the natural result of my choices, had been a carefully constructed lie. The truth had set me free, not just financially but emotionally. I no longer doubted my worth or questioned why my path seemed so much harder than others. I understood now that the playing field had been deliberately tilted against me by the person who should have been my strongest advocate. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text from Stephanie, nervous about dinner next week. "Grateful we will face it together." I smiled as I replied, "We will be fine. We are stronger than we know." And that was perhaps the most valuable lesson of this painful journey. Adversity, even that created by deliberate malice, could be overcome. Truth, however, painful, was preferable to comfortable lies. And sometimes the family we build through honest relationships is more meaningful than the one we are born into. The woman who had once worked herself to the point of collapse now understood the importance of balance, of self-care, and of healthy boundaries. The daughter who had accepted less than she deserved now advocated confidently for herself and others. The sister who had been cast as the practical, independent one had discovered creative talents and entrepreneurial spirit that had been suppressed by financial constraint. As I drifted towards sleep, I felt profound gratitude, not for what had happened, but for what had come after. The betrayal had been real and painful, but so was the healing, the growth, and the new life I had built from the ashes of that family dinner 1 year ago. Have you ever discovered a betrayal that ultimately changed your life for the better? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our deepest wounds. Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share with someone who might need to hear that family betrayal does not define your worth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your story is still being written one day at a time.